Fission 3.0's COO, Ross McElroy.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's well, I guess it's a great sector when you can be a weirdo and yet be successful. So this is the life of a geologist, I guess. I think the Fission 3 story, a good place to segue in from where Dev left off, is to I'm going to scoot through to I think slide 10 or 11 here. Look at the properties in the basin. I've been involved in the uranium exploration business, I guess, since pretty close to the mid '80s, 87 when I got my start. So I've seen a few projects in a few areas. The one thing that I find is common is that the most successful projects, and Deb touched on the talk in Fission, is that most of the successful mining operations have been shallow. So if you look at the 70 plus years of uranium mining in the province of Saskatchewan, I don't know if this pointer works up here, but basically where you see the little blue circles up at the top, 10, 11, 12, that's the Beaver Lodge area. That's where uranium mining in Saskatchewan first kicked off. That was back in I guess it was probably the early 1950s when the first uranium deposits were found there. Along comes the latter part of the 1960s. And by the way, up in that Beaver Lodge area, there was, I think it was discussed earlier today, it was like something like 52, 70 mines. Most of them were fairly small mom and pop operations, but there were a number of near surface uranium mines considered high grade, and they still are fairly good grade. Not quite the grade that's been discovered in the true Athabasca Basin, more, a little after that in the 1960s and 70s. But anyway, so we go from Beaver Lodge, and then the discoveries in the late 60s, the Key Lake and Rabbit Lake discoveries right along the edge of the basin on the eastern side, and that's where all the focus moved. So everybody kind of left the Beaver Lodge Uranium City District, went down and chased the high-grade uranium deposits of Key Lake, and then, of course, as Corey mentioned earlier, you have the discovery of MacArthur, Cigar, not in that order, but, you started getting some super-grade deposits on the eastern side of the basin. I guess the thing that I've always noticed is that there's high-grade uranium potential almost everywhere in the basin. They're not particularly easy deposits to find because, as been discussed earlier in Saskatchewan, they're small footprint. So you're looking for small targets. I hold a lot of high-grade uranium, in a very small area, but so there's nothing particularly unique to where they can be in the basin. And one of the way that we found that as a junior, how you can beat other people at their game, is to be looking where the majors are not. The majors, the Camecos, the Oranos, these guys, they have a dominant land position. The eastern side of the basin is, there are some pockets in there where there's some projects that, are available, but they are dominant landholders in the area. We wanted to look in a new virgin area. There has been some mining out on the western side. Clough Lake is a good example. The Clough Lake mine on the western side of the basin, probably one of the more successful of the western ones up until recently. But it does show you that high-grade uranium is not unique necessarily specifically to an area. So we went out on the southwest side and with Fission Uranium. We made our discovery at PLS in 2014 when Fission 3 was formed. We started picking up ground outside of what we had in Fission Uranium, and so that's why we have a pretty good land package to the north of our PLS project in Fission Uranium, the Triple R deposit. We've got the PLN, so we do have a dominant land position still in the southwest side of the basin. Obviously, that's where some of the more important recent discoveries are made. Our project is one of them. NextGen have the Arrow deposits. So within about the last 6 or 7 years, you've already, by drilling, outlined over almost 500 million pounds of uranium, and I think that number's sure to grow. If the pattern that we saw on the eastern side of the basin follows through, you start seeing these structurally hosted deposits. You get multiple ones along prospective trends. I'm pretty sure we'll see the same thing. We are seeing the same thing in the southwest side. We've got Triple R. You move a little further, 3 kilometers up the trend. NextGen's property, they have Arrow. A little further on, you've got another discovery called Spitfire on a Pierpoint Cameco Orano joint venture. Those are just the early stages of new deposits occurring in there. And I think one of the things we want to have a good dominant land position there. We think that that's important. There's more discoveries to be found. Going back to the original part, what's happened up in the Beaver Lodge areas, I think the attention moved, reasonably so, over into the Key Lake area, but there's been a lot of, that's been probably 50 years or so since there's been some true exploration up in that Beaver Lodge area. So we have, we're right in our properties that we have up there, right in the heart of where these 50-odd plus uranium mines were operating at one point in history. There's a lot of uranium still up there. There's showings, there's drilling. The technology, I guess, and just the way we explore has really evolved and changed over the last 50 years. We think we can go back to some of these areas where, where exploration and mining had been pretty important and make new discoveries. We do have high-grade showings of uranium up in those projects as well. I do want to see if I can, before we get into projects, I don't even know how much time we'll have to get into details on some of them, but one of the things that led to the success that we had at PLS, being near surface, we could look for signatures of high-grade uranium. We were fortunate enough to find high-grade uranium boulders that had been transported by the last ice movement 10,000 years ago that scoured the then surface, deposited these uranium boulders down into a field, and that was what we discovered. We found that with an airplane radiometric survey. So we outfitted a plane specially with very sensitive, kind of like Geiger counters, I guess, anemometers loaded up in a plane, something that we were able to use an airplane as a prospecting tool, which, back in the day, you'd probably have to have about 500 geologists out there scouring the ground with their machines. We were able to load this into an airplane, fly much greater areas, have better coverage, and do it in a fraction of the time. That's what led to the boulder discovery that we found at PLS, ultimately led to the deposit. Once you have boulders, there's a source. So that was the trick there, was to find out where it is. And that's the benefit of looking for or having potentially shallow deposits. So going back, why are we looking for deposits that are shallow? Because we think we can make the discovery. Are there going to be deposits in the middle of the basin around say the A or the B in Athabasca Basin? Of course there are. There probably are. They might be 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers depth. The one thing we've seen, you better have a spectacular deposit if it's going to be deep. It better be big, it better be high grade, or else it's it's not going to have a chance to move very far down the line. But so our properties, everything in Fission 3 is generally shallow. We work under it's not much of a, for the geologists, I think most people understand that the Athabasca Basin was much bigger at one time, and certainly at the time of formation of these deposits. These are old deposits, typically several hundred million years old, might be 800, maybe 1 billion years old. So you have to, if you want to make discoveries, you have to sort of imagine, what did the basin look like at the time? Why are they formed where they are? So that allows us to pick up properties that are off basin. So by today's standards, you might not think that the Athabasca Basin extends there. Do you have a deposit? Well, we've shown at PLS that in fact you can get a very significant deposit outside of the basin margin. We're about 3 kilometers on that project to the current basin margin. Did at one time have a sandstone cap? Probably. It might have been a typical unconformity and basement root deposit, and then but right now what's left is a basement hosted deposit, but near surface. And so that's really what we have. We've been able to put some money recently. We've been able to raise some significant money into Fission 3. I think the perception is that the uranium sector is getting better, that exploration companies, it is the time to start exploring, and I think that's sort of the message you're getting from a number of the companies here today. It was dormant for the longest time. We picked up our properties when really nobody was looking at uranium exploration, so we were quietly picking up ground that we thought looked prospective, but we weren't really spending any money. And it's only recently, this calendar year, that we started putting that money to work. And so we do have a number of drill targets on these properties. We're in all cases, we're in either historically important mining districts, currently important mining districts, and future mining districts. We can find uranium, I think, pretty much everywhere around the rim of the basin, but using the techniques that have been fine-tuned over the last 20, 30 years, it just gives us a much better ability and approach to make those discoveries of those high-grade but small footprint deposits. I think we've got a team of geoscientists that have been very successful in the past. Under 3 companies ago, as Deb mentioned, we've gone through a number of iterations and selling of assets, and so our company's changed hands a few times. Started with Fission Energy. We made the discovery around the Waterbury Lake area, a little north of Cigar Lake, right in the McLean Lake, the mill area, so somewhere where you see McLean Lake, Rabbit Lake. That was our first discovery back in 2010. And then we, under a different company, Fission Uranium, made the PLS discovery, and we think with Fission 3, we're set to either, find, we'll be looking in all of these areas. We're currently drilling up in number 14, our Cree Bay area, another interesting, very underexplored region. If you look at the major structures that run through the Athabasca Basin, there's a thing called the Virgin River Shear Zone that runs from the north up at 14. And there, by the way, there's old historic deposits near our Cree Bay up in that area. And you run down into Cameco's Centennial deposit down to the south. These are the sort of structures, as Corey was highlighting on their project, that you're looking for. You're looking for the trends, the prospective fertile corridors, and we think we have one on Cree Bay, so we want to put some holes in there. We're near known mineralization, so that's always a good sign. You're on a structural trend. You've got nearby historic mines. That's an excellent exploration target. So we're drilling in there currently. We'll move over next into the Beaver Lodge area, where we have high-grade boulders in a situation very similar to the PLS area, so we'll be exploring there in July. So I suspect we'll be able to do some radiometrics and possibly some drilling. And then we're also going to move back around the PLS area, our property PLN, which is so named just to confuse everybody. It's very, it's one letter away from PLS. Both, basically, they were all part of the same project, almost part of the same project at one time, so hence the naming. We'll be back drilling in there. We think that that's an excellent corridor. If you look at the deposits already outlined, as I mentioned, with us, Next Gen, Pure Point, and then you also look at a bigger scale, and you look at the overall structure. You've got Key Lake, you've got Shea Creek, and you also look at the trend of the geophysics, which is all north-south in that area. There's wiggles. This is really what you're trying to find. You're looking for these little nuances and wiggles along these major corridors. So we'll be back in there, and if our track record is anything to go by, and generally that's what that's the best thing you can go on. I think we've been very successful in the past. I'm sure we're very hungry to make another discovery. We think Fission 3 is the right vehicle to make the next discovery in the Athabasca Basin, so that's primarily the Fission 3 story. I won't touch on it too much, but we do have a project down in outside of the basin, and that's in Peru in the Macusani district. It was actually the first project into the Fission companies back in the 1990s. I think it was 97, and that property was folded in. There's a lot of uranium that's been discovered there, over 100 million pounds in various deposits in the area, plus now it's a new lithium area where Plateau Energy has discovered a very high-grade and significant lithium deposit. We're located within a few kilometers of that, so there is some renewed interest to do some work down in that area. But primarily, we're looking for high-grade uranium in the Athabasca Basin. We're active and happy to go over if anybody has any questions on the company or the project. Sure.
Hold on one second.
Ross, Dev skipped over it pretty quickly here, but last time we spoke, you were talking more about the at Fission, the fact that you might do more drilling and make a decision on starting with the underground.
You're talking about Fission Uranium on the PLS project.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. So where we left it off, we just completed a pre-feasibility study that conceptualized this as an open pit and a hybrid operation, open pit to underground mining. That works. You know, the numbers showed that was an economically positive environment. However, looks even more attractive if we consider this as an underground only option. At least that's what the cursory look at the PEA discovered. So part of what we're doing at PLS now, we're completing a pre-feasibility on our underground only scenario to see, and then we can measure which way we're going to go forward with it. But regardless of that, the PLS project, all the economics are done on 2 zones. So we have our Discovery 00 zone and then the 780, which is the biggest zone of all by far. We've since since we started the economic studies back in 2015, we've also made discoveries along trend of high-grade zones. We have 3 other high-grade zones within a few hundred meters of each other along the trend. So when we're talking about doing more drilling, that's to build up the resource overall and be able to bring those zones into the mine plan, hopefully. So part of our view going forward this summer and into the winter is to do drilling, particularly on the main satellite zones, the 840, which is about 400 meters away from the pre-feasibility resource right now. We want to put some holes in there, probably about 30 to 40 holes this summer, and basically it's converting inferred resources into indicated. That's the goal there, because advanced economic studies can only be done on indicated and higher zones, and that's really a function of the density of drilling. So on those zones that we have, they're inferred, so your spacing is, it shows you have a zone and a deposit and you can count on it, but you can't actually bring it into the pre-feasibility and feasibility. So that's where that drilling will happen on the project, is to put those other satellite zones into the mine plan, and also to continue to drill deeper and on the high-grade plunge of the main 780 zone. That's where we're going to focus the next round of work. Hopefully that answers that.
Any additional questions for Ross? Otherwise, we can take the questions outside the room, which is just outside the room and right by the patio there. We've got some wine and cheese, beer and meat set up. So thank you everybody for coming to the Uranium or Nuclear Summer Conference, and thank you very much to the TMX group, the TSX and the TSX Venture for hosting us. We hope you guys had a good informative afternoon, and we look forward to having some drinks with you and sharing some thoughts afterwards. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.